Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our second part in our book club, all about overcoming dyslexia, a wonderful book written by Dr. Sally Shaywitz. This is our second meeting out of three. If you weren't able to make the first meeting, don't worry, no need for FOMO. We will send you a recording with that one and this one at the end. And this is not like those movie sequels where you have to see the first part to get something out of the second part. You will definitely still benefit from this. It can be standalone. So we're just very excited that you've joined us today. I know we have many parents, many educators, some dyslexia therapists, and I hope that everyone gets some information pertinent to wherever your role is in supporting students with dyslexia. If everyone
Yes, ma'am.
favor and just go ahead and mute their microphone.
Well, he was doing a little bit of work today.
So if we could just keep our microphones on mute, that would be super helpful. And we have two co-hosts who can also help with that. If you do have questions along the way, we will have a question and answer time at the end. You are more than welcome to take your mic off at that time and ask those questions. Or if you just want to make sure you remember them as we go, drop them in the chat and we'll be sure to address them. To start off today, I wanted to introduce myself. My name is Brandon Blaylock. I am the Director of Operations and Community Support for Dyslexia On Demand. We are a virtual dyslexia therapy company we're very committed to making an impact around the world for all students with dyslexia. And when I say students, I mean as little as 5 and as old as 75. We've had the whole range, so we've served them all. We are always working towards individualized therapy towards students, so always one-on-one. We really make sure that every session is facilitated by a certified academic language therapist, which is a very high-level interventionist that has a master's degree, 700 practicum hours with the student, has to sit for a national certification exam, and do continuing education to renew that every year. So something you would expect out of a top-tier professional, just like if you were to go to a doctor or a physical therapist, you'd want someone with a high level of training. We approach dyslexia therapy the same way. We also use a very data-driven approach. As I mentioned, we do a lot of progress monitoring and testing, and we always work virtually with students. That makes us accessible to anyone, anywhere. We've even worked with students on Australia, in Europe, multiple continents, multiple time zones. And again, it's always one-on-one with a certified academic language therapist who's really dedicated to your child's success. And with that comes a whole office team behind us. We have a few office team members on here today. We have Lisa Patton, our Director of Finance and Marketing, and Pam Weidman, our Instructional Quality Assurance Specialist. And our founder and CEO, Megan Pinchback, is enjoying some time in the mountains with her family, but she would love to connect with you, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that later, how you can do that. So if you weren't here before, if you were here before, these might be a little bit of a repeat, but I think it's important for everyone here to know why we chose this book. We chose the book Overcoming Dyslexia because it is truly considered the dyslexia Bible and a staple for anyone affected by dyslexia. You know, back in the old days, you would go through the bookstore and try to find where the book is in a section. This one could be in so many places. It can be in parenting, it can be in education, it can be in psychology. It could also be in the self-help section and motivational section because it offers that for so many parents. So it's really an intersection of anecdotal findings and scientific research for this comprehensive understanding of dyslexia, but more importantly, it's very practical. And the fact that it has a provision of tools for you as a parent, for you as an educator to help students with dyslexia. We will cover many of those tools today, and we're always happy to talk more about those tools with you personally. This book was written by Dr. Sally Shaywitz. It is really hard to not keep that name with the term dyslexia. She is very interwoven in the field of dyslexia as a professor of pediatrics and neurology at the Yale University School of Medicine. She is the co-director of the Center of Dyslexia and Creativity there, and she's very pioneering and known for her studies with functional imaging studies to show the reading brain, what it looks like, how it should look like, and what it can look like after proper intervention. I'll show a little bit about that today, but a lot of that's in our first session if you want to watch that recording. She first wrote this book in 2013, but as we know, science is always progressing the field. There's always updates. So she wrote a second edition that was released in 2020. So maybe some of you had some nice pandemic reading from that. But point being, there have been a lot of updates. We are going through the second edition. If you read the first edition, you're still getting great news and great information, but this will kind of give some updates as well. So session one that we had last month, parts 1 and 2, just so you know what really focused on was what dyslexia really is, what dyslexia looks like in kids. If you go back and watch that recording, you'll find a nice breakdown of dyslexia by age, things to look out for, things that are struggles, ways to intervene. And then also we talked a lot about dyslexia diagnosis and why that matters, why testing is so critical, or especially early identification. So if you are kind of new into the dyslexia journey, I would really encourage you to go back and read some more. It's going to give you those fundamental facts about dyslexia as well as about diagnosing it. So we will record that, or we have that recorded, and we will put that in the email that we send tomorrow. But I always like to bring up this quote, which is dyslexia is an island of disability in a sea of strengths. We are here to talk today about dyslexic strengths and ways to make our children shine to where they meet their full potential. That is really the focus of this session. And we will be covering parts 3 and 4 of the book. Next session will be 5, 6, and 7. But in this section, it's really helping your child becoming a better reader, talking through just how the brain learns to read, and then also transforming reading struggle to success. We'll dive a little deeper and say if your child has dyslexia, if they're older, still struggling, how can we really do that? And the reason that's so important is this very cliche Dr. Seuss quote from the book, The Places You'll Go. I know many of you may have read it around this time of year when graduations are happening, but it says, the more that you read, the more things you will know. The more that you learn, the more places you'll go. And that's really the truth about reading. It's not about making bookworms who are spending hours in the library every week. It's about giving children access to be able to read the world around them, to unlock the world around them, to pick something off the menu that's not a picture because they can read it. So keep that in mind as we're going through. We are looking at those very tangible day-to-day gains that we want to see and how we will make those happen. So this picture of this little boy is really the desired transformation. Some of you may be here with your kids. You're getting out those summer reading books and it's a struggle. You hear the groans, you see the posture slump, you go, oh, mom, it's the fight back and forth. And you just want them to look like this when they read. You want it to be a happy experience. You have great memories of reading as a kid, all these stories you can recall. But when you're in this state, it doesn't feel that way. So how do we get from here to here? Well, it really lies beneath the skull. We actually have to change the brain. And in the first session, this is an fMRI study that was shown that showed a dyslexic brain, probably what this brain looked like on the outside while reading too, of a child with dyslexia before remediation, before any intervention was given, versus after the appropriate intervention was given. You can see in these are areas responsible for reading, you're now seeing activation. That's why they're enjoying that ability to read. Their brain has been turned on. There are areas now that are active for reading. But the ultimate question is, this is wonderful, but how do I really make that happen? And that's what we're really going to work on today is the how. What's needed, who's needed, and when it's needed. So the first part I'm going to go over, I believe it was chapter 16 through 19 or 16 through 18. It was helping your child become a reader. So again, this is kind of talking about reading instruction for all kids, best practices. These are things that have definitely been updated between 2013 and 2020 that I will cover here in a minute. So I do want to make sure that we get this in here. The science of helping your child learn to read. This is a very important quote from the book. The principles of effective instruction are known. The tragedy is that so many children do not receive it. So today we're going to talk about what those principles of effective instruction are, as well as how you can ask the right questions to ensure your child's receiving that. First off, I know many of you have kids here. It's probably why you're here. When your kid comes out and they're born, you start talking to them and one day they start talking back to you. It's kind of just natural, right? They hear you, they mimic you in the good way that kids do. And but reading is something that is not a privilege. It's a basic and essential right. And unlike speaking, that just comes naturally from exposure and having interaction with someone, reading is not innate. It is a learned skill. It must be taught. You will find a few kids out there that are quick learners, and it feels like they didn't have to be taught. That is very rare. It is not normal. Most kids need to be explicitly taught, and some need to be taught further. The brain is not pre-wired for reading. That picture I showed you with that fMRI, those are all areas of the brain that have to connect to each other. Those neural pathways must be built intentionally to allow for reading. I'm not sure how many of you live in a busy metroplex. I live in the Dallas, Texas area, and I see orange cones everywhere I go or road closures. There's detours everywhere because they're always trying to make new connections through the city to make things more efficient. Guess what? Eventually, when it's done, for that brief moment that it's actually done, everything does run smoothly and efficiently. But it's a real pain when things aren't running efficiently. When you say, I wish there was a highway here, because it would make my route so much faster. In the brain, we have to help build that highway. It's going to be under construction for a little bit. It's not going to be pretty, but the goal is to get that highway built, to make it faster, to make it smoother, to make it more efficient. And dyslexic brains use less efficient routes, which is why we need to really make sure we're building those neural pathways in their brain to create that efficiency so that they are reading fluently. So what does effective reading instruction look like? And what is that recipe for success when we're looking at reading instruction? We know it must be taught, but how do we teach it? Well, here's some basic components. The first is reading instruction must be explicit, meaning every single skill must be taught clearly and directly. You should never assume that a kid already knows something. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they don't know it to the level of mastery to apply it to something else. And therefore, you are building a house from the roof down. I've never seen a house built that way because I don't think they last very long. We're going to build it from the foundation up. So making sure we are being very explicit in our teaching, being clear and direct with our students, making sure every concept is introduced. And it must be introduced in a systematic way. It's kind of like if you were to have a meal, you don't want someone to push the whole plate across and say, you got 3 seconds to eat it. You're not going to enjoy the meal. You're going to be sick afterwards. It's the same thing with learning things like reading. You have to build this step by step with no guessing. We'll talk about how this is integrated into programs in just a minute, but systematic means it is step by step. There is a certain approach to take. Just like if you're building that highway, you've got to think about alternate routes while you're under construction. Where am I starting? Where am I finishing? What's going to be affected along the way? Same thing with reading. Also very critical is it must be phonics based. We all know that reading requires attaching letters to sounds. If you've ever met a kid who's never read before, they may know their letters, but they may not know their sounds. Or they may know their sounds, they may know their letters, but they have no idea how they go together. That has to be taught. We have to make that connection as well. The fourth aspect is it must be multisensory. We know that areas of the brain for reading, in order to activate those, we have to use other areas that are already strong, such as the visual areas, the auditory areas, and those kinesthetic gross muscles to create those connections in the brain. Just like if you're building a highway, you don't just come and just dump concrete. You've got to be able to build that framework. This multisensory aspect uses all of those big other tools that the brain already is developed on to build that network in the brain. And the last is extremely critical, which is it must be emotionally supportive. So we need to make sure that child is progressing and building confidence and motivation along the way. That is an extremely important thing for measuring as you're going to ensure that child can still continue their stamina in instruction and is seeing the success of that. So in the book, Dr. Shaywitz gives a model for teaching reading, and she mentions 4 key pillars when we're looking at reading intervention. And the first is we need to have early identification. This is meaning that we're tracking a student's reading progress as early as kindergarten or even at the preschool level. There are ways that we can track that, and your school should have access to those. If you want more information, there's a lot of that in part 1 of the recording. The next is we need to have a science-based approach to instruction. This has been thrown around a lot in the past years, the science of reading and structured literacy. I'll get into those terms a little bit more, but we need structured literacy that aligns with the science of reading to ensure that they are really getting instruction on how to read and really be able to read anything put in front of them. And then, of course, ongoing assessment is going to be key for reading instruction. We need to use data to guide that instruction. We can't just listen to one book and say, oh, that kid's got that pattern down. Oh, that kid is such a reader now. Okay, you're good. You don't need any more instruction. You have to build it step by step and use your data to guide that. It's kind of like your roadmap when you're taking a road trip. And last, it really needs to be intensive, skilled intervention. This is key critical. If you go to any school, you're going to find someone that says, I'm the reading specialist. That term has a lot of different meanings. So you really want to make sure that this is a well-trained person who knows all of these pillars, who's doing all of these pillars and more that we're about to talk through. So since I said structure literacy was so important, Dr. Shaywitz really dives into this quite a bit in the book. I want to make sure you know what these elements include. And I'm also going to give you how this differs from balanced literacy in a minute. But structured literacy is the gold standard for reading instruction. It is really used to build foundational brain pathways for reading in order to produce an automatic and fluent reader. And so children have to have practice, they have to have structure and explicit instruction. This is good for all kids, but especially dyslexic kids. So this little light bulb and everything around it is basically the step-by-step process in a structured literacy. You can see we start with phonemic awareness, we go into sound symbol association, then we advance to syllable instruction. So this is knowing the sounds, knowing how the letters represent the sounds, putting multiple letters into multiple syllables to make bigger words, knowing with morphology what those big words means, knowing how to put all those big words together with syntax to make sense, and then also knowing the semantics behind things, being able to comprehend what we read. And it truly takes everything in this little rainbow to make that reading automatic, fluent, and meaningful. What you'll hear a lot as the structured versus balanced literacy. This is something that was really updated between the two editions of the book. And so I wanted to cover this because a lot of you may have been exposed to balanced literacy in school. Some of your kids, unfortunately, might still be exposed to balanced literacy in school because it was kind of the way of the classroom for a really long time. So as we talked about with science of reading, this would be the same passage, the same book presented to a kid. And in the science of reading using structured literacy, and just so you know, science of reading just describes the body of research with structured literacy. Structured literacy is that implementation. So in a structured literacy classroom, what's going to happen is they're going to look at this picture, but really they're focusing on the words here. They've learned the sounds and they're decoding these words. They've learned all the patterns or all the words, whether they're sight words or such, that would be presented to them. And they would be expected to blend the sounds and read the words. The student would be able to identify and isolate the sounds and blend them together to read the word track. So let's say this is the word that they're struggling with. That would be the approach under structured literacy for track. In a balanced literacy approach, we're going to say, oh, well, that word looks hard. Look at the picture. What makes sense? Guess the word. I'm going to tell you, I don't read a lot of picture books as an adult unless it's to my children. So that's not really teaching reading at that point. The teacher would just continue to say, look at that picture. What is Eric running on? Because it says Eric runs on the. So we're just going to guess it and associate the picture with the word. And then the student says, a red road? That's not the word, right? Because they also may not even know that word. A lot of words that kids come in contact with are foreign to them because they may not know that word and they may not be able to guess that word by the picture, and that's not reading. And if you want more information on structured versus balanced literacy and how we really got back to structured literacy, I would highly recommend, I'm going to throw some recommendations in here just for you because I figure if you're here, you like to learn. But I would recommend listening to the Soul to Story podcast. It's by Emily Hanford. She's put out multiple seasons now, and it details the journey of how balanced literacy kind of overtook American reading education for a long time and how we've gotten back to structured literacy. So throw that on in the car and you can learn more about both of those approaches. It's a really good podcast, a really fascinating listen. But really the takeaway from this section as far as science of reading and structured literacy is Dr. Sally Shaywitz says there is hope because of this science. There is neuroplasticity in the brain showing there is a possibility to rewire this brain to be a reader. And guess what? Even if that brain is a dyslexic brain, it can still normalize, just like that transformation picture I showed you earlier. And those reading networks can be built but it does have to be with the right type of intervention. And more importantly, what works for students with dyslexia works for all students. That's very key critical, especially because we want that early identification of dyslexia. So if a kindergarten teacher knows structured literacy, knows science of reading, and they're implementing that, that's going to impact your dyslexic child in a positive way. Will that instruction be enough? They may need more, but it's going to lay a good concrete foundation for them. So let's kind of get into those different aspects that I talked about with reading and what reading is really made of. When we talk about reading, we talk a lot about cracking the code. It's kind of like the hieroglyphics back in the days, right? You see it, you don't know what it means. But here, if you think about when you learn to read, it is a code. Those letters represent something. They represent sounds. So instead of starting with the letters, you want to start with the sounds. That's where we're really looking at phonemic awareness. So a lot of times we think that starts with sight, but it really starts with the ears. We want students to hear and manipulate individual sounds in the words. That's what's going to happen when we tell them to sound it out. A lot of times we skip to hear and say, just sound out the word. Well, if they don't know the sounds and how those relate, how can they sound out the word with letters? So we have to start at the ear level, making sure they're hearing, manipulating, isolating, blending, segmenting individual sounds and syllables and words. And then we can move on to the eye. We can start looking at the letter and associating the sounds. So when we're decoding, we have now really mastered sound symbol correspondence to where when we see a word like track, we can unblend it, look at the individual sounds, and then blend it together into a word. This can be a little bit laborious at first, and eventually you want to build it up to fluency, where they're decoding with such automaticity because their brain instantly recognizes that word and can instantly blend those letters and sounds together, and they have reached fluency. So that's when we're reading with speed and accuracy at a rate to actually comprehend. So to dive a little deeper into phonemic awareness, phonemic awareness is that understanding or words are made up of discrete sounds, which we call phonemes. If the that root means phone as far as sound, like telephone, there are 44 phonemes in the English language. If you recall, there's only 26 letters. So we have to really work on getting all of those sounds in first, as opposed to just saying what each letter is, because sometimes we combine letters like T and H, and it makes a unique sound like th or th. But when we're looking at phonemic awareness with a child, we want this child to be able to isolate, to blend, to segment, and manipulate these sounds. So for example, you would want to incorporate activities like rhyming, like do the words cat and rat rhyme? Okay, yes, they do. What about cat and right? No, they don't. That's why nursery rhymes are so fundamental to reading at these early ages. It's also helpful to have kids tap out sounds where they're isolating them. So for example, if you give them the word sheep, they should know there's 3 sounds in that word, sh, e, p. Don't worry it's about spelling at this level. We're just working at the sound level. And we're practicing changing those in those words. So for example, if I were to give this word sheep, I say, okay, now instead of e, say I. We have sh, I, p, ship. It helps them see how language can change and how words are related. Another resource I wanted to mention that's really great for phonemic awareness is this book called Equipped for Reading Success. It's by David Kilpatrick. I know as therapists, we use these drills all the time with our students, and it's working on onset rhyme, basic syllable, basic phoneme, advanced phoneme, on all of those abilities, where you're basically just giving ear exercises to a kid. Okay, say cat, now take out k and say instead, rat, making sure that they can do this and building up that automaticity, because we know that this is the foundation of the house. And once that's there, we can truly work on their decoding and then their fluency and comprehension. So how do we get to that decoding? We can stay in sound land for a long time. Some kids need to stay with sounds for a while. And some kids get those sounds down, but we got to get out of that. We got to get to the letters. We have to help them understand how to decode. So moving from sound to symbols, you got to think about decoding is the heart of reading, being able to really crack this code. Now we're connecting graphemes to phonemes. Graphemes are just the written representation of the sounds, so that if you see the letter D, you know that's associated with the sound duh. And if you hear the sound duh, you know that it would be the letter D. Back and forth. You need to be able to do it each way. So we work on that sound symbol correspondence to help blend sounds into words. One way to do this, this is something that Dr. Sally Shaywitz mentioned in the book, and I wanted to give you an example here, is practicing with decodable text. This is not leveled readers. I feel like I can't say that loud enough. The leveled readers are balanced literacy. If your kid's reading level A, B, C, G, H, they're moving up the alphabet, they're using that balanced literacy approach with the pictures, guess the word. This is looking at patterns. So it's building from simple to complex patterns. This is an example of a decodable text, and these are free online. They're from UFLI, UFLI. It's the University of Florida Literacy Institute. They have a whole curriculum and everything's posted for free on their website, which is really nice. But this is from lesson 23. You can see at the top, this student has just learned H, says, and the passage is the big hut. Anything that's produced in here, anything that's present in here is something that this student has already learned. So they've already either covered these words through sight words, or they've covered them through explicit teaching, learning what short vowels are, like E saying eh, O saying ah. And you can see there's a lot of words that start with an H in here. This is not going to be something that's very enticing and thrilling like a novel, but it's something that is going to build decoding skills, because we don't want children to guess at words. We want them to decode them, because we want them to be able to understand and read anything they read and come encounter with, because that is the foundation for the next step, which is fluency. So decodable text are super important. It may not be the book on the shelf at your library, but is a key part of reading. And so next we really look at how do we become a reader? If we're looking at decoding, we're kind of looking at that choppy reading. We're still in the sounded out phase sometimes. I like to relate this to learning piano or becoming a piano player. I grew up playing piano and I paused, I guess I retired at the age of 17 when I moved and I lost my piano teacher. Well, recently I got a piano back and I was very fluent in piano at 17. Let me tell you, when I picked it back up at 41, it did not sound very fluent. I had to work on my decoding skills a little bit more at the piano, making sure I could get those notes on the staff to match the keys, and making sure I could go along to where I could keep momentum, keep dynamics. Reading is just the same thing. We want to build that decoding, but we want it to be a dynamic process. So we're looking now for automaticity, working for effortless word recognition, to where they see the word, they can say it. There's no more at, in, the, at, bat. It's all there. They're just saying the hat and the bat. And so fluency really comes when we're reading at an appropriate pace with accuracy and expression. This is something that I think is a struggle for kids now with artificial intelligence popping up. And, if you have an audio reader to your kid, it is very important to have someone who can read with fluency and with prosody and with expression, because that's how they're going to learn. They're going to want to model it. And then this is the end point really for reading. There's really no point in reading unless you can understand. So when we're working from decoding, working on that fluency, we also want to work explicitly on comprehension, meaning understanding and engaging with the text. So fluent readers can focus on meaning, not just the mechanics. When we're just in the decoding phase, we're focusing on mechanics. We eventually get out of that phase and go into that fluent aspect where we're focusing on meaning. We're enjoying the story. We're interacting with the story as we go. And it's important to note, to build fluency takes a lot of repetition. I don't know about you. I actually enjoy doing the same thing over and over again sometimes, like watching the same shows, reruns, all of that. And that's actually something that's kind of necessary for reading, is reading some of the things over and over again, covering the same concepts. Because remember, we're working at this decoding level to build fluency, comprehension, and confidence. So repetition is going to allow the brain to recognize those words instantly. It's not that we're memorizing the word, it's that we're getting better at seeing the patterns and connecting them close together. No one can remember and memorize every word in the English language. Even though you are looking at a word and you instantly know what it is, that is fluent reading. You are still reading. It is not that you're just pulling out all of those individual file folders of all of those words in your brain doing that. But with repetition, we're reinforcing decoding patterns as well as sight vocabulary. That's why those decodable texts, rereading them is very important. And we're improving confidence and reducing that reading fatigue. No one likes to sit there and read one paragraph for an hour And sometimes that's what it can feel like to a kid if they haven't had good fluent reading instruction. We want it to feel effortless so they can read more, be able to connect it to more meaning. So some good recommendations there are having guided oral reading where an adult is listening and giving feedback as you go, as well as assisted reading. Audiobooks, I love audiobooks, especially like I mentioned when it's things that are with prosody and expression, when they're really good readers. A lot of the professional actors out there that do that it's really great for kids. And that would be assisted reading. We call it ear reading, but you can also get the book for the student to follow along with. They're hearing it and following along, seeing the word, building that into their brain. And then also repeated reading of the same passage multiple times. This is something we do with our students on a weekly basis. We give them one passage, they practice it every day for the whole week. And what we do is we measure their growth because typically the first day they make some errors, they may be a little slower. The last day of the week, they're much less in the errors and their rate is much higher. And guess what happens? Their confidence soars. They see, I can be a reader. I'm the one who made this much growth. I just have to put the time in and have those repetitions. So I know that it's sometimes hard as a parent saying, well, this all sounds great, but what can I actually do? I want to give you a few tangible tips. And they're really easy ones. These are some things that Dr. Shaywitz mentioned in the book, but you can really work even if you're not good at working through those decoding skills. It's hard to find the right text and passages. Just building comprehension and vocabulary, there are simple ways you can do this in the car with your kids because those are going to be some of the best predictors of reading comprehension when we come down to it. So make sure that you're talking often and about everything. Anytime you're explaining a process, whether you're talking about what you're doing in the kitchen and how you're fixing this for dinner, there's going to be new vocabulary that's introduced to your children and they're able to see it in the context of action. And we know that oral language will feed that comprehension, their listening comprehension, and will translate into their reading comprehension. And then read books aloud. I think so often parents are like, I don't know what level I should get my kids to read at. A lot of times kids can have high listening comprehension, meaning they can understand in the absence of print. And you want to feed that comprehension. So you can choose some more advanced text with more enriching stories above your child's level to build some of that background knowledge, to build that vocabulary so that when they're becoming a fluent reader, they're there. And then introduce new vocabulary intentionally. And you can do this easily just by repeating what your child says in a unique way. If they're like, wow, that's a really big tower, you can say, oh, yeah, that's a massive tower. Or I got really mad today because I didn't do well on my assignment. Say, oh, I understand when you're frustrated and disappointed because things don't go your way. Reframing them into bigger words so they understand how the semantics of all English works is going to help them also understand as they are going through their reading instruction. And then also, you can pause during reading, ask questions, model thinking, be like, oh, I can't believe that character did that. What do you think? Why do you think they did that? You don't have to have your child always be the one reading in order to be an active partner in their reading instruction. It's very important to think about that. Next, just making sure you're encouraging independent and motivated reader. Skilled readers are built, they are not born. I have yet to meet a baby who comes out reading a book. I don't think that would ever happen. The science tells us not. So I really try to foster independent reading at any level. Make a print-rich environment with books, magazines, comics. It does not have to be what's in the fourth grade section at the school library. It can be younger books. It can still be picture books. It can be instruction manuals. Offer choice. That interest is going to drive the motivation. I used to have kids that would love to build things. And so even just giving them instruction manuals on how to build stuff with pictures in it, they're still reading some pretty complex vocabulary about construction. Think about your child's hobbies. Think about their skills. Choose associated text that can be even at a more elementary level for them to be able to do that because you're really just wanting to build their reading stamina gradually. Don't feel like you have to set the timer or don't feel like you have to say, we're going to do all this reading today. Like, here's your stack. We're just going to get through it. Just go for it. There's unique ways to do that. You really want to focus on progress, not perfection. So track books finished, not errors made. All right. Find a way to make sure that you can celebrate whatever progress was there as opposed to saying, oh, well, you didn't really read that well. So I don't think that that's the right book for you. Use those times when it looks like it's too difficult to step in, do the guided reading, do the assisted reading, and just celebrate their risk taking of, I'm so glad you picked up that book. How was it? You want to read a page together? Just really partnering along with your child. So that is just about some basic reading instructions and elements of reading. We're going to go ahead and move into part 4, which is turning struggling readers into proficient readers. So this is where we dive a little deeper into the dyslexia aspect and what quality dyslexia intervention looks like, as well as how you can make sure that your child has access to that either through your own pursuits or through the school. So again, there was a chapter in here in the very beginning of part 4 about a student named Michelle, and I believe she was the 3rd grade going into 4th grade juncture, and she came to Dr. Sally Shaywitz and she just couldn't read. She had a lot of gaps in her instruction. So they basically developed a plan. And a lot of the things that they developed were making sure that she had evidence-based programming that was progress monitored, that she had the right supports in school to help her. And it really relates to these pillars of a successful model. So I love this quote from her. The most effective programs are not fancy. They're faithful to science. Oftentimes you're going to see all kinds of things advertised to you that look fancy. I fall scam to them too sometimes. And guess what? You get them and they're really not that great. You really just want something that's effective. So we're going to cover what an effective reading intervention looks like, especially for a dyslexic child. The first is early identification for reading risk. I like to say it's never too early, it's never too late, but the earlier, the better. So really, you want to make sure that you have a good pulse on your students' reading abilities from that preschool, if they're doing with onset rhyme and being able to produce those rhymes, and in kindergarten, how they're doing. There's a lot in part 1 about that. So definitely go back and look at what those risk factors are. But then if you're starting to see they're at risk, you want to truly make sure they're getting the right type of instruction, even just for fundamental reading instruction, especially when you need to look at dyslexia intervention. So that's making sure they have explicitly structured literacy instruction. And of course, who's guiding that? You want to make sure it is a skilled, well-trained educator. We'll dive deeper into what that truly looks like in a minute. And you want to make sure there's this ongoing assessment feedback loop, that data is driving that you're truly seeing quantitative gains, that you're closing the gap and moving in that right direction. And a lot of that's going to be contingent, especially if your child's in a public school or a private school, on having that strong school leadership who is making sure all of this is being implemented, regardless of the circumstances, regardless of the schedule, regardless of the teachers on campus, that is always in play. So what does this mean for parents and schools? This is where I want to talk a little bit about making sure that we're having conversations with schools. It's very important. A lot of times we assume, oh, the school's the expert, they've got it. And a lot of times they do, but sometimes they don't. And when they don't, they really don't. So it's important to ask these questions no matter how you feel about your school. So I wanted to give you kind of some stems here that you can dig from, especially because we're only, what, 6, 7 weeks away from starting a new grade? Kind of crazy. So ask your child's school if they use structured literacy and if they screen for early reading risk. Again, those were mentioned a lot in part 1, so go back and read those, but use those words. Do you use structured literacy or balanced reading literacy? If they are like, I don't know the difference, that's probably a red flag for one. So ask that. Ask that in the beginning of the year conference. How is my child learning to read? Are they using structured literacy? And ask the school, okay, well, what about your teachers? Do you advocate for teacher training and science-aligned reading intervention? Are you making sure all teachers are aware of this intervention and to make sure that those classrooms are going to look the same? That's going to be extremely important. I once had an administrator who said the biggest single determinant of a child's classroom and academic success is the quality of the classroom educator. And that is very true. It's not just the quality of that classroom educator, but what are they learning and what training are they implementing? Are they keeping up with the science of education and science of reading as mentioned here? If you're a school or an educator, it's important to ensure that you are selecting a program that is evidence-based, structured literacy, and that it can be scalable and affordable and sustainable. Do you only have one teacher who teaches that program? Because we learned last time that 1 in 5 students is dyslexic. You're going to need more people, or you're going to need a program that can tailor to more small groups. And you want to make it affordable because you want to make it accessible to everyone. We know schools operate on a budget, but we also know schools have many dyslexic students and then that need this help. And you're going to want to make sure that whatever you choose is in alignment with IDEA, ESSA, and science of reading, all the legalities that are involved in educational rights. And students should achieve reading gains that close the gap. It's also, as a parent, okay to ask your administrator, Can you show me some data to show that this program is effective? Any good program should have some data published out there, redacted data from a student showing how that student closed the gap or made those individual gains with that instruction. Do that beforehand. Don't let your child be the guinea pig or the experiment. Make sure that they're actually involved in something that's going to be effective because time is of the essence, as we've learned. So let's talk a little bit about what proper school intervention or just dyslexia intervention looks like. She really focuses more on school in the book. I want to let you know if your school doesn't have this, there's probably not going to be a lot of mountains moved in the next 2 months to get it there. But there's other ways you can seek this, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. But the what, as far as proper intervention, is making sure that you have the essential components of reading. That includes everything we've talked to up to this point: phonemic awareness, phonics and decoding, fluency, vocabulary, comprehension, and it must be evidence-based. There must be data to show its efficacy with students, showing that standard score, norm reference, showing that it will produce results with your child. Next is when the intervention occurs. You always want to make sure, especially when you're working with a dyslexic student, kind of to go back to my construction analogy with all of those highways, it takes a lot longer to build those highways in the brain of a dyslexic student. Therefore, you really have to work at a therapeutic intensity. Most programs will have fidelity standards associated with them that also produce that data that you want to see those results. And you need to make sure the school's adhering to that fidelity standard or that frequency. It can vary for as little as 180 minutes, 360 minutes per week, and how it's broken down. You need to just make sure whatever they're going to execute, that one, it is evidence-based and that they're doing it with fidelity. You also want to think about optimal learning times, making sure that that's intervention is really made a priority, that it's not just, oh, because this teacher happens to have availability from 12:22 to 12:41. It's not going to be long enough. Making sure that it's a time that they can truly learn and that they're getting enough repetitions. I would also encourage you to ask, well, what will my child be missing during this intervention? If they're missing PE or art or an elective that's something that's a strength for them at school, that can be a little bit of a red flag. Typically, students are going to get this intervention when other students are doing their reading instruction, the stuff that's going to be much harder for them. This is more of what they need at that level. So making sure that they're getting the right frequency, both within the day, enough long-term in order for the fidelity standards, and enough repetitions to build mastery. And then, of course, we covered the how earlier, making sure that it is explicit instruction, that they're getting direct instruction on every concept, that nothing is assumed learned, that it's systematic, that it's following that scope and sequence. If you need have any questions about scope and sequence, we're happy to answer those. We're big believers in that because that's basically the order of presentation of sounds and letters that are going to help build those pathways in a way that's going to matter and create gains. And we also want to make sure it's cumulative. It's building upon that previous teaching and it's spiraling back because we always know that's repetition and it's going to help them remember. And lastly, you want to make sure that it's a multisensory intervention. Like we mentioned, the dyslexic brain really needs to activate the visual, the auditory, and kinesthetic. That's what that acronym VAC stands for, in order to be effective instruction. So making sure that you ask, how is this instruction going to be done? Making sure those 4 elements are definitely there. This image right here, if you're not familiar with it, I wanted to include it. It's Scarborough's reading rope. And this really talks about how everything that we have done here, phonological awareness, decoding, this is all under word recognition. Then we have to focus on comprehension. All of these strands need to be worked on independently and woven together for skilled reading. This is an approach that will do that. So you just want to make sure that that is going to occur because you want your child to have that automatic skilled reading the further they go into intervention. And I would encourage you, when you're having that conversation about the school, don't just talk about programming. It's okay to talk about people in this context. You want to say, okay, this is the program, who's doing it? I would request that you have a name of a person. It's very helpful. That way you can really check their credentials. You want to ask about the rigor of the training of the interventionist. Sometimes these reading programs, if they're not a true dyslexia program, it's just a reading program, it's like an hour or 2 workshop in order to do that. We know that that's not going to be intensive enough to really be an expert, to be diagnostic and prescriptive. So ask about the rigor of training. Ask about which programs they've received training in, how they received training in them. These evidence-based programs do require a high level of training, and you want to make sure that they are doing that training appropriately, that it was overseen appropriately, and they have proven competency on that. Ask about their background in dyslexia to make sure that they truly know about the dyslexic brain. That's going to help your child get the supports they need. This is going to be your champion when it's looking at school intervention or just intervention in general. So I mentioned this earlier. Can this person be diagnostic and prescriptive instruction? In part one, we talked about how dyslexia affects 1 in 5 kids, but it manifests so differently. And so you really want to make sure this person is in tune with your child and what they need, as opposed to just teaching to a group of 7 or 8 kids because that's what the program says to do. And then ask about the credentials of that person. Obviously, they're probably an educator, they're probably a certified teacher, but there are certain licensures that are beneficial when you're looking at dyslexia intervention. We always use certified academic language therapist. The abbreviation for that is CALT. And those are people, if you see that acronym, you know that they are trained in an evidence-based program. They have their credentials checked and their licensure is insured by a third party. So that is really your gold standard. There are also some through the Orton Gillingham Academy, if they're like a fellow or a certified level, that you can kind of ask about. But it's really good to double check the credentials of that person to ensure that they can be truly therapeutic and make the most of the intervention. So a skilled teacher, not a program, is what's going to change that trajectory of a dyslexic child. And I know it can be uncomfortable to ask questions. I've sat at lots of IEP meetings in the role that I am now, as well as a teacher. And I just want to encourage you, when you're asking questions, you're not doubting them. Caring parents ask questions not out of doubt, but out of dedication. And not only are you speaking up for your child and asking those questions for your child, if 1 in 5 students is dyslexia, you're also helping them guide to ensure that everything's happening appropriately for all students there. The last section in this book was really helpful. And one that I always really love because it really talks about the dyslexic student's soul. You know, we are always looking at the whole child here, and this is so important. Looking at beyond just reading, how is this child functioning from a social emotional state? We know there's a lot of emotional consequences of dyslexia. For one, chronic self-doubt that I can't do this, I'm never going to be worth this, I'm dumb. A lot of times they have anxiety around school, especially when they get the big circle and say, it's your turn to read. They're like, time to go to the nurse, you know? They feel that shame, that isolation, that fear of maybe someone's going to realize I can't read and know that I'm dumb and they don't want to be friends with me. And we can measure reading all we want, but we can't measure self-worth. That's something that kind of comes from the inside, but it's so critical in this process. The damage inflicted by reading failure is not limited to academics. It cuts deep into a child's sense of self. That's a quote direct from the book. And so when we are looking at what we're doing here, we are not just teaching the child to read. We are enhancing their self-worth, giving them that positive aspect and identity. So make sure you're really protecting your child's confidence no matter where you're at in this journey, whether you're just starting and they don't even really struggle yet. Maybe they're in kindergarten, they don't know, they don't feel different than their peers. That's awesome. Sometimes we get kids that are in high school and they've had the battle scars. But guess what? You can still do something as a parent. Give them that unconditional support. So celebrate their efforts, not just their outcomes. Help them really get an accurate diagnosis. Like I said last time, if you have a dyslexia diagnosis, it's basically now unleashing the roadmap to your child's success. It's going to help their understanding of how their brain operates. It's going to give them relief. This is treatable. This is how my brain is. Other brains are like this. It's not going to give them shame. It's going to give them answers. So sometimes a diagnosis can really make a huge difference in a child's belief in themselves. Also, provide safe environments. Make sure they're in safe environments. Again, ask the questions at school. Make sure they're in a safe environment. Some teachers aren't aware of dyslexia or don't do that. Make sure that they're able to avoid humiliation. Don't be afraid to tell that teacher, please don't have them read aloud in front of the class. I'm happy to have them read aloud to you independently. This is what we're dealing with. I'm watching out for my child's mental health at this point. Also, just encourage mentors. Find those teachers who are true champions for your child. Therapists, whether it be a certified academic language therapist to help with reading, a mental health therapist to work on that self-worth, and family members that will really affirm them along the way. Help them learn how to create affirmations for themselves. Also help them name their strengths. There are so many strengths that dyslexic individuals come, the world would not be what it is without dyslexic individuals, because many of the findings and advancements that have been made are because dyslexic individuals think differently. So help them recognize their creativity, their empathy with their friends, their ability to solve problems, and avoid overemphasizing academic success. It is so hard when that's all the school is sending home. Grade reports, they get numbers shoved in their face all the time. And even though all teachers say grades are private, guess what happens? They're all whispering what they got. And your child may feel like, "Oh, that I'm the only one making a 65." There's a reason for that, and it's something that's easy, and that's not the end all be all. So don't overemphasize that academic success. Yes, it's important, but it's not the only thing. And we really just want to try to build a resilient future for these kids. Going through this intensive intervention, it can sometimes be 2 to 4 years for some kids. You can't take away your child's dyslexia like that, but you have to instill that powerful resilience for them. And that's going to help them fuel themselves through intervention and understand themselves better in life. Speak openly about dyslexia as a difference, not a deficiency. We've really moved away from saying disability for dyslexia just because of the fact that it is something that there's so many abilities with it. So make sure you just talk about the difference, why your brain thinks the way it does. Model that self-compassion and perseverance, and encourage interest outside of reading. Reading is so important. We've talked about that plenty, but let them see their strengths in sports and art and building Legos and performing on stage in dramas and exploring nature. And do provide the opportunities where they can succeed in those areas of strength. Don't feel like because they can't read, we have to lock ourselves in the house and get this fixed before we can live life. Need to live life along the way so that they can really keep up their self-worth and build that resilience to see what they're really contributing. So this is a great one down here. You are the steady force that helps them rewrite the narrative from I can't to I can, just differently. So I wanted to end with this, and I brought this up because this is actually our four-pronged philosophy as a company. And it's kind of interesting. It's not like we are diehard Sally Shaywitz spokespeople, but our four-pronged philosophy really aligns with a lot of the things that we did in this book, in this section, and providing individualized one-on-one dyslexia therapy. We talked about how that's necessary, how every dyslexic is different, and how their brain needs to be taught in a way that's going to work for them. Making sure we have experts such as CALTs that are progress monitoring with data-driven results and data-driven navigation. Working on those social and emotional aspects of dyslexia, helping your child understand what dyslexia is, what that means in the classroom, what that means for reading, what that means outside of reading. And then also just making sure that parents are continually being able to advocate and be educated about dyslexia for their child. It's probably one of our greatest responsibilities as parents and privileges as well. We do all of these things in everything that we do. This is really part of our advocacy and education outreach in order to help kids through therapy. We are always happy to discuss about your specific needs. We are very much on the informational front, so we would love to connect with you to talk about your child's specific needs, how it pertains to their dyslexia, and how intervention can help them, and what that would look like for your child. We have many students that we serve, and no two students are the same. No two approaches are the same. So some other resources that we have for you is, again, you can contact us. We'll put a link in our email tomorrow with the recording that you can talk about our individualized Coutlet therapy. As we talked about with nourishing the soul, we're really hopeful to help our students feel empowered going back to school. So we're actually having a back to school webinar just for kids and adults too. You can log on with them. And it's going to be really cool. It's going to be led by Megan Buchanan. If you don't know who she is, she's founded a company called Grit. She's dyslexic herself. She was a cast member on the show Outlast on Netflix. She's like a big hiker excursion kind of person. She was trying to hike to the North Pole, do that whole thing. That got closed down this year, but she's going to be the host of this webinar. She does this out of her passion for kids. So if you're looking for a way to talk about dyslexia with your kid and empower them, this is great. You can sign them up. It's virtual. A recording will be sent out as well, but you can log them onto the computer and let them hear from someone who's lived and walked this journey. And then lastly, our owner, Megan Pinchback, has a podcast with her advocate friend called Don't Call on Me, the Dyslexia podcast. And this is also really helpful because you're hearing stories of hope and of resilience, like we talked about, that feature dyslexic individuals of all ages, all stages. Sometimes it's a kid with their parent, sometimes it's a professional in the movie industry, all kinds of people who talk about how dyslexia shaped them as a person. A lot of stories of hope. So it's a great one for that. That said, we are finished with this section of our book for part 3 and 4. Does anyone have any questions? You may unmute yourself or you may type it in the chat. And if you don't have a question now, you are more than welcome to email us after. Sometimes it takes some soak time. Okay, since there are no questions as of right now, I just want to say thank you so much for dedicating your lunch hour to be here with us. Or if you're watching the recording, which will be sent out tomorrow with those resources, thank you so much for doing that. Let me check the chat. Oh, we just have a thank you. Thank you for joining us. And we do have our last part. It's on Friday, July 25th. A recording will still be sent out as well. That will be parts 5, 6, and 7 of Overcoming Dyslexia. And that will cover turning potential into achievement, preparing for college and career, and discovering dyslexia at any age. All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop my recording. I do have some questions, so I will answer those after I stop that. But thank you guys so much for attending. You're more than welcome to log off at any time. Jan, I'm going to get your question right now.